The morning of June 4th, 1943, found Unifisir Herman Butcher gripping the railing of the transport vessel as he navigated the gangplank at Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. His legs, unsteady after a grueling 14-day crossing of the U-boat-infested Atlantic, barely supported him. Through the residual haze of the morning air, Butcher encountered reality that immediately shattered 3 years of carefully constructed Nazi propaganda. He witnessed an integrated workforce, black and white American dock workers, operating side by side, commanding gargantuan machinery that seemed to belong to a future century. Women, clad in standard-issue coveralls, directed massive cranes, while children hawked newspapers near the main gates. In this sprawling industrial landscape, nobody exhibited fear or hostility at the sight of enemy uniforms. Butcher turned to a man behind him and whispered the stark assessment, "Asterisk, die spinnin' die Americaner." Asterisk, the Americans are crazy. This moment, meticulously documented by Butcher in his 1952 memoir Behind Barbed Wire, one of the most detailed accounts of POW life in America, marked the beginning of a profound cognitive shift. The Norfolk base itself sprawled across 4,300 acres, its docks disappearing beyond the horizon, its cranes simultaneously servicing dozens of ships. In a single morning, this one port processed tonnage that vastly exceeded the weekly capacity of the port of Hamburg. Yet, it was not the sheer industrial scale that stunned the arriving prisoners. It was the unsettling normalcy. Civilians wandered freely near sensitive military installations. Vendors sold hot coffee and fresh donuts within clear sight of battle-ready warships. A local brass band played popular music just yards away, supporting a war bond rally. Here, 2,500 battle-hardened veterans of Rommel's storied Africa Corps stood in formation on American soil, the first major contingent of what would eventually become 425,000 German prisoners held in the United States by the war's conclusion. What these prisoners witnessed in the subsequent months was far more destructive to the military mind than mere American abundance. They saw a nation at total war that profoundly refused to act like it, a society so secure in its existential power that it treated mortal enemies less like invaders and more like errant house guests. Their strange customs and inexplicable behaviors would prove to be a more insidious challenge to Nazi ideology than any battlefield defeat. The processing at Norfolk commenced with what Butcher termed the first impossibility. German military doctrine, rigidly practiced from Poland to France to Africa, dictated that prisoners were either valuable assets to be ruthlessly exploited or simply burdens to be minimized. The Geneva Convention was acknowledged. The Geneva Conventions, often treated by belligerents as aspirational guidelines or simply ignored when inconvenient, were here enforced with striking rigor. American officers, fluent in German, meticulously read the Articles of War, detailing prisoner rights and even inquiring about specific dietary needs. International Red Cross record from June 1943 confirmed a remarkable scene. Jewish American personnel, including several sergeants with clearly Jewish surnames, distributed aid packages. They explained to bewildered Wehrmacht soldiers that specific kosher meals were readily available for any Jewish prisoners. Several German prisoners reacted with nervous laughter, convinced this was an elaborate form of psychological mockery. In fact, the American military had genuinely prepared for the religious dietary requirements of their enemies. The subsequent medical inspections defied all established military logic. German prisoners with severe wounds received the same dosage of penicillin, that revolutionary miracle drug barely accessible even to German field hospitals, as the American soldiers themselves. This level of care was officially verified. Swiss Red Cross Inspector Guy Matro noted in his July 1943 report that the medical treatment provided to German PS equals or exceeds that given to American military personnel. Prisoners expressed genuine disbelief at the quality of care. The cultural clash was equally profound at the receiving facilities in Norfolk. While the U.S. military remained largely segregated, African American medical personnel served in these integrated POW units. There is a documented case of a black medical technician drawing blood from senior Wehrmacht officers for routine health screening, a routine military procedure in America, yet an interaction strictly and legally forbidden under the racial codes of the Third Reich. Perhaps the most incomprehensible spectacle occurred during their first meal. The German prisoners were marched into a mess hall where American sailors were already dining. These two groups, mortal enemies who had recently been engaged in deadly convoy battles, ate within the same facility, sharing the identical food lines and the same high-quality rations. The Americans, focused primarily on a radio broadcast announcing a baseball game, displayed no overt curiosity or hostility toward the Germans seated 50 feet away. The subsequent 3-day train journey to interior camps introduced the next layer of cognitive dissonance. Unlike the secretive, hidden prisoner movements characteristic of Germany, American authorities made no effort to conceal the presence of the POWs. These were not cramped boxcars, but actual passenger coaches equipped with cushioned seating, stopping at major civilian stations where local populations gathered to observe. At Union Station in Washington, D.C., the arrival was witnessed by hundreds and meticulously documented in station logs from June 1943. From the confines of their transport trains, German prisoners of war witnessed the casual intimacy of American domestic life. Wives openly embraced husbands departing for training camps. Children waved miniature flags, and teenagers shared milkshakes at the bustling station restaurant. Enemies and families shared the same platform, the only barrier being the glass and a handful of guards whose attention seemed fixed more on managing the civilian flow than on securing their high-value cargo. As the rails cut through the industrial heartland, the prisoners observed a spectacle of unconcealed economic might. Factories, typically hidden or camouflaged in Europe, openly displayed their names in giant lettering. At the famed Glen L. Martin aircraft plant in Baltimore, acres of parking lots, filled with the personal automobiles of workers, were visible from the rail lines. Prisoners could systematically count the B, 26 Marauder bombers awaiting delivery, a clear exhibition of American industry operating in plain sight, devoid of security paranoia or the need for wartime secrecy. Traversing Pennsylvania, the trains revealed coal mines and steel mills running continuous, triple shifts, their blast furnaces illuminating the night sky with an orange, relentless glow. Around these complexes spread miles of workers' housing, individual homes, complete with gardens and radio antennas, a stark contrast to the utilitarian barracks of the Reich. During a documented stop in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, German officers observed the shift change. The American laborers wore leather shoes and wristwatches, carried full lunchboxes, and drove personal vehicles. According to Butcher's memoir, the casual waste displayed by one laborer, who discarded a half-eaten apple to open a fresh one, stunned the officers, many of whom had seen their own men fight over meager scraps on the North African front. The final destination for many was Camp Hearn, Texas, which opened in December 1942. Situated on 720 acres near the town of Hearn in Robertson County, military records confirm the facility was designed to house up to 4,800 German prisoners under conditions that often exceeded the quality of life they had known as civilians. The sheer scale and quality of the infrastructure, thoroughly documented in Army Corps of Engineers records and War Department files at the National Archives, immediately challenged the German understanding of wartime prisoner treatment. The wooden barracks featured electric lighting rather than oil lamps, indoor plumbing with flush toilets, and hot water heaters in every building. Prisoners slept not on straw pallets, but in individual beds complete with mattresses, sheets, and blankets, and had access to recreation halls furnished with amenities like ping-pong tables. The true measure of the camp's exceptional nature was captured by Swiss inspector Emil Sandstum. In his authoritative August 1943 report, Sandstum observed, "Conditions at Camp Hearn exceed not only Geneva Convention requirements, but surpass living conditions many of these men knew in Germany." This assessment underscored a profound discrepancy between the expected treatment of enemy combatants and the opulent reality provided. This unusual environment was established from the outset by the camp commander, Lieutenant Colonel Cecile Stiles, whose detailed service record is preserved in military archives. Stiles, having studied German at university prior to the war, personally addressed the arriving prisoners in their native tongue. He outlined the standard military regulations, but then introduced an unprecedented policy. The prisoners would largely govern themselves within the confines of the compounds. They retained the right to elect their own spokesmen, organize cultural activities, and manage their daily schedules, constrained only by overriding military requirements. To the captured German soldiers, This level of self-governance seemed like either an act of profound Allied weakness or a cleverly disguised trap. The commitment to prisoner welfare extended critically to medical care. The camp hospital, subject to rigorous monthly inspection by the International Red Cross, housed state-of-the-art equipment that many German civilian hospitals demonstrably lacked. It boasted X-ray machines, fully equipped surgical suites, modern dental chairs, and abundant pharmaceutical supplies, including the newly available wonder drug, penicillin. This superior care proved vital when prisoner Georg Gartner, who would later achieve notoriety as the last German POW to surrender in 1985, developed acute appendicitis in September 1943. Gartner received emergency surgery within hours, performed by Captain William Calhoun, an Army surgeon from Dallas, assisted by German medical staff drawn from the prisoner ranks. Yet, perhaps nothing was more disorienting for the prisoners in the camp canteen, a dedicated store where they could purchase goods using script earned from voluntary labor. The inventory transcended basic necessities, offering cigarettes, chocolate, soap, writing materials, musical instruments, and art supplies. The War Department, whose authorization for these sales is meticulously documented in Quartermaster Corps records, operated under the calculation that small, purchasable comforts would successfully maintain prisoner morale and significantly reduce costly escape attempts. The idea that enemy prisoners could browse a store, choose luxury purchases, and have needs catered to beyond mere survival fundamentally scrambled traditional military thinking regarding captured personnel. By September 1943, severe labor shortages sweeping the nation led to a rapid expansion of POW employment throughout Texas. The War Manpower Commission, working in close coordination with the Provost Marshal General's office, authorized the deployment of prisoner labor into critical agriculture and non-military industries. For this work, prisoners earned 80 cents per day in canteen script, matching the base pay allocated to American privates, a system whose detailed records of operations survive today. Accessing the National Archives Record Group 389 reveals a profound cultural shock experienced by German prisoners of war stationed in Texas. At the colossal King Ranch near Kingsville, the captured soldiers encountered American agriculture on a scale that shattered their European frame of reference. Covering 825,000 acres, an expanse demonstrably larger than the state of Rhode Island, the ranch's operations were meticulously documented between 1943 and 1945. These records confirm that German prisoners labored directly alongside Mexican-American vaqueros and African-American ranch hands in cattle operations. This unavoidable racial mixing in the workplace, though strictly curtailed in social settings, serve as a potent daily contradiction to the rigid racial hierarchies propagated by the Nazi regime. Prisoners' letters, which successfully navigated military censorship, consistently documented their astonishment at the level of mechanization employed. They witnessed single combine harvesters executing the work that would have required dozens of laborers in Germany. Crops moved via large trucks, entirely displacing the familiar horse-drawn wagons of a European theater. Furthermore, the King Ranch even employed small civilian aircraft, a technological application unheard of on German farms, to survey vast cattle herds and locate strays. Ranch employment records indicate that Foreman Richard Clayburgh Jr. deliberately managed the German prisoners as temporary workers rather than wartime enemies. This philosophy extended to the industrial processing sector. At massive cotton gins across Texas, including documented sites in Taylor, Caldwell, and Waller counties, the POWS observed processing speeds that defied European standards. The Hearn Cotton Oil Mill, which utilized prisoner labor from August 1943 to December 1945, processed more raw cotton in a single day than German textile mills typically handled in a month. Yet, this intense productivity was achieved not through harsh discipline, the Wehrmacht experience, but through regular breaks, substantial lunches, and the simple amenity of radios playing during work shifts. Perhaps the most jarring realization was the palpable freedom of political expression. Declassified FBI monitoring reports from the 1970s reveal the German POWs were genuinely shocked by American farmers openly criticizing President Roosevelt, complaining about government policies, and doing so without any apparent fear of consequence. This defiance reached a peak in one documented incident near Bryan, Texas, where a farmer, engaged in a heated crop allocation dispute, instructed a Department of Agriculture inspector to go to hell. The farmer faced no retribution. Such an open challenge to authority in Nazi Germany would have been a death sentence. The integration of the prisoners into the local economy was widely chronicled. Contemporary local newspapers throughout Texas, including the Hearn Democrat, the Bryan Daily Eagle, and the Temple Daily Telegram, ran stories detailing the POW work details and their community interactions. These accounts provide vital verification of social encounters that fundamentally stunned the military prisoners, such as the Hearn Democrat-S report in December 1943. The supervised Christmas shopping outings offered the German prisoners of war a stark, unfiltered view of American teenage culture. They witnessed young people gathering at drugstore soda fountains, boys and girls mingling unchaperoned, a freedom alien to the regimented youth of the Third Reich. These adolescents danced to jukebox music, embracing the sounds of jazz and swing, music that Nazi ideology had venomously denounced as degenerate Negro music. Their attire, notably fashionable despite the ongoing global conflict, underscore youth culture decidedly absent of the militarization pervasive in Germany. What truly stunned the prisoners, however, was a profound autonomy of American women. They observed women driving heavy trucks for the Hearn Cotton Oil Mill, operating independent businesses along Main Street, and, crucially, supervising male workers within critical defense plants. At the nearby Bryan Army Airfield, the presence of female pilots was undeniable. As part of the Women Air Force Service Pilots WASP program, these women flew military aircraft. Military records confirm WASP operated from Bryan Field between 1943 and 1944, often visible to the German POW details working in the surrounding areas. Furthermore, the community extended a remarkable olive branch as churches throughout Robertson County invited German prisoners to attend services. Specific church records from institutions like the First Baptist Church of Hearn, the First Methodist Church, and St. Mary's Catholic Church all document German POW attendance. The local press highlighted this unusual integration. The December 24, 1943, Hearn Democrat reported that German prisoners attended Christmas Eve services at multiple churches, sitting among congregation members whose sons serve overseas. No incidents reported. By early 1944, the U.S. government formalized its effort to counter Nazi indoctrination. The Special Project Division of the Provost Marshal General's Office established sophisticated educational operations at Camp Hearn. Declassified record from Record Group 389 revealed the meticulous extent of this secret re-education program. Though to the prisoners, it was presented merely as voluntary education. The camp library, initially stocked modestly with 500 books donated by Hearn citizens, rapidly grew to surpass 5,000 volumes by August 1944. Through the American Library Association's Books for Prisoners program, texts were provided that included works by German authors explicitly banned by the Nazis. Prisoners could access Thomas Mann's A Magic Mountain, Erich Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front, and the writings of Jewish authors like Lion Feuchtwanger, books whose mere possession in Nazi Germany would have constituted a capital offense. Furthermore, Sam Houston State Teachers College, now Sam Houston State University, supplied correspondence courses. College records confirm that 340 German POWs enrolled in subjects including English, American history, mathematics, and agricultural science between 1944 and 1945, with professors from the college regularly visiting the camp. The intellectual environment at Camp Hearn was rigorously structured, requiring monthly lectures and examinations for the prisoner population. Central to this ideological battle was the camp press. While the publication thereof was associated with Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, the prisoners at Camp Hearn produced their own distinct newspaper, titled The Spiel, The Mirror, a publication not to be confused with the later German news magazine. Copies meticulously preserved within the Army Heritage and Education Center offer a striking narrative of ideological transformation, showing a clear evolution from overt Nazi propaganda in the early 1943 editions toward robust discussions of democratic governance by late 1944. This shift was no accident. Declassified documents from the Special Project Division reveal a sophisticated apparatus of psychological operations designed to maximize ideological transformation across the camp population. The program categorized prisoners into three distinct groups: the approximately 10% identified as anti-Nazis, the large majority of 75% classified as non-political prisoners, and the entrenched 15% who remain ardent Nazis. Treatment protocols were meticulously tailored for each category. Anti-Nazi prisoners, identified through careful screening that included the analysis of letters, private conversations, and library reading choices, were granted additional privileges and education. These rehabilitated individuals were then cultivated as barracks leaders, discussion group moderators, and, crucially, newspaper editors, allowing their influence on the non-political majority to be strategically amplified and monitored. The sophisticated screening process, developed jointly by Army psychologists and German émigré advisors, utilized subtle tests, documenting prisoners' reactions to news of German defeats, their selections from camp libraries, their participation in educational programs, and their social interactions. Weekly reports tracked every subtle ideological shift across the camp population with clinical precision. Assistant Executive Officer Major Maxwell McKnight, whose extensive papers are archived at the Hoover Institution, recorded the program's success in November 1944 report, noting the transformation rate exceeded expectations. Approximately 60% of non-political prisoners show measurable movement toward democratic ideals after 6 months of exposure to American society and targeted education. Beyond the classroom, exposure to American industry provided a visceral shock. Working in American facilities, the prisoners of war witnessed a casual abundance that stood in stark mockery of severe scarcity gripping the Reich. At the Alcoa aluminum plant in Rockdale, Texas, where POWs handled critical materials from September 1943 onward, American workers discarded more aluminum scrap in a single day than German aircraft factories could procure in an entire week. Archival plant records confirm that German prisoners of war were frequently detailed to scrap collection duties, offering them unsettling exposure to the sheer volume of American industrial waste. However, it was the assignments within food processing plants that often delivered the most profound psychological shock to the men. At the Stokely Brothers Cannery in Cameron, Texas, a location verified by Milne County Historical Records as utilizing PW labor from nearby Camp Hearn, the prisoners witnessed an unprecedented spectacle of industrialized abundance. Perfectly edible produce, tomatoes slightly underripe, corn with irregular kernels, beans with minor blemishes, was systematically designated for destruction, a stark counterpoint to the growing starvation faced by civilians back in Germany. P. Corporal Friedrich Muller, in a letter preserved within Red Cross archives, articulated this cognitive dissonance. Today we destroyed hundreds of pounds of fruit because it did not meet canning standards. Fruit that would be treasure in Germany is garbage here. The American supervisor apologized to us for the waste, not understanding that he was apologizing for abundance we couldn't imagine. The observance of Christmas 1943 at Camp Hearn stands as a unique case study, extensively documented across local newspapers, Red Cross reports, and military records. The entire town of Hearn, a community of approximately 2,000 residents, collectively mobilized its resources to ensure that enemy prisoners received a proper, traditional holiday celebration, a response that fundamentally contradicted the expected norms of wartime antagonism. The Hearn Democrat published a complete inventory of these remarkable donations on December 23, 1943. Local churches successfully collected 4,800 individual gift packages, while schools contributed handmade cards and intricate decorations. Notably, American Legion Post 164, comprised of World War I veterans who had previously fought German forces, donated cigarettes, candy, and sports equipment to their current enemies. Civic organizations joined the effort. The Lions Club provided musical instruments, and the Garden Club adorned the compound with holly and evergreen boughs. The centerpiece was a camp Christmas tree, captured in newspaper photographs, standing 30 feet tall in the main compound, illuminated by electric lights that burned continuously. Quartermaster records reveal that the electricity consumed by these decorations surpassed the total electrical usage of many German villages, rendering such a lavish electrical display unthinkable even in peacetime Germany. Furthermore, local churches offered Christmas concerts in German for prisoners. The First Methodist Church choir famously learned German Christmas carols phonetically, led by Mrs. Sarah. The performance was directed by Patterson, the choir leader whose own son was actively serving in the Italian theater. The profound cognitive dissonance of American mothers serenading enemy soldiers while their children battled Germans proved emotionally shattering for several prisoners, according to subsequent Guard reports. Quartermaster records meticulously preserved the details of the Christmas feast, a staggering menu that included roast turkey, 1 pound per man, ham, candied sweet potatoes, green beans, cornbread stuffing, cranberry sauce, both mince and apple pies, ice cream, beer for enlisted men, and California wine for officers. This single meal totaled approximately 5,000 calories per person, a stark contrast to the 1,200 daily calories rationed, when available, to German civilians back home. Working in Texas exposed German prisoners of war, PSWs, to American racial dynamics that systematically challenged both Nazi propaganda and the idealized reputation of the United States. The reality, documented extensively in military reports and local newspapers, was far more complex than either narrative allowed. At Camp Hearn, Negro soldiers from the 359th Infantry Regiment occasionally performed guard duty. German PSWs, indoctrinated by Nazi racial ideology, suddenly found themselves having to submit to the authority of black Americans. Several prisoners requested transfers rather than yield to Negro authority, only to have these requests swiftly denied by the camp administration. Lieutenant Colonel Stiles stated in a December 1943 report that German prisoner objections to Negro guards are noted and ignored. Yet, these same prisoners witnessed the glaring contradictions of American segregation firsthand. They were permitted to dine in Hearn restaurants and attend movie theaters where their own guards were forbidden service or relegated to segregated sections. German enemies, in specific social contexts, enjoyed greater social freedom than the American citizens assigned to watch them. This profound paradox, being treated better than some Americans despite their status as antagonists, fundamentally scrambled ideological certainty, particularly at agricultural work sites documented in Farm Security Administration records. Prisoners worked alongside Mexican-American and Negro laborers, and the demonstrable efficiency of these mixed-race crews, when focused solely on the task, directly refuted Nazi theories, asserting racial purity equated to productivity. German PWs picking cotton alongside black workers were frequently outperformed, forcefully undermining assumptions of inherent racial superiority. The transformative potential of the American experience is illustrated by 3 well-documented cases, beginning with Herman Bircher, who arrived at camp. Hearn arrived in June 1943, a convinced Nazi, but his subsequent memoir chronicles a gradual ideological collapse spurred by accumulated observations. The decisive fracture came during Christmas 1943, when local Hearn citizens offered presents to enemy prisoners. His written reflection on this moment is deeply profound. These people whose sons we had tried to kill gave us gifts. Their kindness wasn't weakness, but strength. The confidence of victors who knew they had already won not just the war, but the peace that would follow. Hearn subsequently immigrated to America in 1953, became a citizen in 1958, and worked successfully as an engineer for General Motors until his retirement. The narrative of assimilation was sometimes clandestine. Georg Gartner escaped from Camp Deming, New Mexico, in September 1945. Rather than fleeing the continent, he chose to remain in America illegally, living under the assumed identity of Dennis Wiles for 4 decades. He married an American woman, raised children, and worked as a tennis instructor in California. When he finally surrendered in 1985 for a television documentary, he had been an American resident longer than he had been German. His story, documented in his autobiography, Hitler's Last Soldier in America, powerfully validates the transformative power inherent in American society. Reinhold Pell escaped from Camp Washington, Illinois, in 1945, motivated not by mistreatment, but by sheer boredom and an overwhelming curiosity about American civilian life. According to his memoir, Enemies Are Human, he lived illegally in Chicago for 7 years, working in bookstores and marrying an American woman before his voluntary surrender in 1953. The ensuing FBI investigation revealed he had broken no laws except illegal entry. He ultimately received citizenship in 1959 and became a successful businessman, later sponsoring other German immigrants. The German POW experience varied across America's 500-plus camps, yet consistent patterns of education and utility emerged. Camp Alva, Oklahoma, for instance, became a specialized center for agricultural training. Department of Agriculture records document how German POWs meticulously managed a 200-acre demonstration farm, employing advanced American techniques. Prisoners gained vital skills in mechanical cultivation, systematic crop rotation, soil conservation, and hybrid seed development. These sophisticated skills proved invaluable when the POWs returned to devastated post-war Germany. The camp's agricultural program was so successful that local farmers hired the German work crews at premium wages, thereby creating competition for local labor. Camp Concordia, Kansas, meanwhile, became renowned for its impressive art program. German prisoners of the unexpected cultural footprint left by the prisoners is still visible today. Murals created by these men continue to adorn the Stone County Courthouse and several local buildings. The camp orchestra, equipped with instruments generously donated by surrounding Kansas communities, performed regular concerts for civilian audiences. The local press, including the Concordia Blade newspaper, reviewed these performances favorably, often noting the surprising professional quality demonstrated by the enemy musicians. This artistic output now forms permanent collections within Kansas museums, a tangible reminder of the wartime internment experience. Meanwhile, life in other camps presented severe logistical challenges. Camp Trinidad, Colorado, for instance, faced the extreme brutality of the High Plains winter, where temperatures routinely plummeted to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Quartermaster records confirm that the U.S. Army responded by providing German prisoners of war with Arctic-grade clothing, heavily insulated barracks, and significantly increased caloric rations, reaching 4,000 calories daily during the winter months. This extraordinary level of provision was formally noted by Swiss Inspector André Poncho in February 1944, who starkly reported that German prisoners at Trinidad received better winter provisions than Wehrmacht troops on the Eastern Front, according to prisoners' own admissions. Yet, perhaps no provision was more strategically devastating to the German military mindset than the American policy of information transparency. Prisoners were granted access to uncensored American newspapers that openly criticized the war effort, detailed production problems, and discussed strategic failures. The Special Project Division intentionally provided these diverse news sources, operating under the calculated assumption that exposure to a truly free press would inherently undermine the foundations of totalitarian thinking. Recreation halls provided access to radio programs featuring commentary sharply critical of military leadership. Comedians like Bob Hope openly mocked generals and politicians, while journalists such as Edward R. Murrow questioned fundamental strategies. Congress publicly debated military appropriations, with dissenting opinions broadcast nationally, all of which was accessible to the enemy prisoners. The spectacle of the 1944 presidential election campaign, observed within the camps, seemed like an act of democratic suicide to many German military minds. Franklin D. Roosevelt faced a serious wartime challenge from Thomas Dewey. Republicans freely criticized the management of the conflict. Opposition views filled the newspapers, and political cartoons ridiculed the commander-in-chief. Yet, the war effort not only continued but arguably strengthened. This profound demonstration of democracy's resilience, manifesting through open discord rather than despite it, fundamentally challenged the authoritarian assumptions upon which the Third Reich was built. The overall standard of care was uniformly high. Inspection reports from the International Red Cross, preserved today in the ICRC archives in Geneva, consistently rated American prisoner war camps as exceeding the requirements of the Geneva Convention. The verification of these conditions was provided by neutral assessments, offering crucial, objective verification of the American camp system. In his comprehensive August 1944 report, Inspector Guy Metro documented that American camps consistently exceeded treaty requirements across all crucial categories. He noted that food rations equaled or often surpassed those provided to American military personnel, while medical care was maintained at a standard equivalent to American military hospitals. Furthermore, the educational and recreational opportunities offered often eclipsed those available at many American military training facilities. Specific inspection findings from facilities like Camp Hearn illustrate this extraordinary adherence to and surpassing of the standards set by the Geneva Convention. Caloric intake for prisoners ranged from 3,300 to 3,800 calories daily, significantly higher than the 2,000 required minimum. Living space allotment was 40 square feet per man, far exceeding the 27 required. Crucially, medical staffing ensured one doctor was available per 500 prisoners, doubling the convention's requirement of 1 per 1,000. Beyond basic subsistence, organized sports, extensive libraries, and robust educational programs were standard offerings, fulfilling the mandate for adequate recreation. This superior provision was recognized internationally. Inspector Emil Sandstom, having previously inspected POW facilities in Canada, Britain, and Australia, stated definitively that American camps provided superior conditions. He attributed the distinction not merely to material wealth, but to a philosophical difference, noting that Americans treated the prisoners as temporarily displaced persons rather than solely as enemies. This philosophy extended into the highly valuable compulsory labor programs, where prisoners of war working in American factories observed production methods that fundamentally revolutionized their understanding of industrial efficiency. At the Lanier Steel Plant in Dangerfield, Texas, where POWs from Camp Hearn were assigned from 1944 to 1945, monthly production figures exceeded the entire pre-war annual output of Germany's industrial Ruhr Valley before Allied bombing began. The key to this astounding output was not solely superior machinery, but motivation. Company records reveal that workers actively competed for production bonuses, suggested efficiency improvements, and took deep pride in their output. Charts displayed each shift production like competitive sports scores and morale, fostered through incentive rather than harsh supervision, drove productivity. The POW workers wore company pins, purchased war bonds of their overtime pay, and even painted the names of Allied bombers onto the steel designated for military use. This efficiency was also evident in logistics. At Texas railroad yards, where POWs loaded critical materials, the sheer coordination astounded German logistics officers. The Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad employed POWs at its Smithville yard, providing the prisoners a first-hand witness to the velocity of American wartime supply chains, where trains arrived on precise coordinated schedules, loading equipment operated continuously, and sophisticated telegraph and telephone systems maintained nationwide coordination. As the spring of 1945 witnessed the final, violent collapse of the Third Reich, American authorities initiated preparations for the massive repatriation of German prisoners of war back to their devastated homeland. This operational planning, meticulously documented in occupation records, quickly transcended mere logistical repatriation. While the War Department famously launched Project Paperclip to secure essential scientific talent, a far broader, calculated effort was simultaneously underway, preparing prisoners of war, PSWs, to become the indispensable bedrock of a new, democratic Germany. The American strategy was fundamentally reconstructive, not punitive. Comprehensive vocational programs were established to equip the returning soldiers with skills necessary to manage a shattered nation. Courses in civil administration prepared these future leaders for managing destroyed cities. Agricultural training emphasized techniques for feeding starving populations. Medical personnel received intensive instruction in public health techniques necessary for epidemic prevention, and engineers studied essential infrastructure reconstruction. Furthermore, the Special Project Division identified and cultivated potential democratic leaders among the prisoners, providing them with additional focused training in governance and administration. The astonishing scope of this preparation is fully documented in the Provost Marshal General reports. By May 1945, the educational initiative had achieved critical mass. 31,000 prisoners of war were enrolled in vocational training. 18,000 were studying English. 12,000 participated in agricultural programs. 8,500 were engaged in technical courses, and 6,200 were learning business administration. In a dramatic move, State Department officials visited the camps, explaining American intentions not to punish, but to actively rebuild Germany. Even the fundamental concepts underpinning the future Marshall Plan were explained to the prisoners well before their public announcement. This incomprehensible act of generosity the victor extending foundational aid to the vanquished, served to shatter the final remnants of Nazi ideology, which had preached racial struggle and the survival of the fittest. The success of this ideological transformation is documented unequivocally in the behavioral metrics. Of the 425,000 German prisoners held in the United States, only 2,222 escape attempts were recorded, equating to a minuscule 0.52%. Even fewer were successful for more than 30 days. 54 incidents, or 0.01%. Sabotage was nearly non-existent, with only 7 confirmed cases, 0.001%, and work refusal stood at just 178 documented incidents, 0.04%. Conversely, voluntary labor participation surged to 87% among eligible prisoners. Post-war surveys conducted by American occupation authorities further confirmed the shift. 74% of returned PSWs held favorable views of American democracy. 61% supported Marshall Plan aid when announced. 55% advocated for a German-American alliance, and 38% expressed a desire to immigrate to America. 23% maintained. The impact of the American experience was not limited to the war years. It profoundly shaped the post-war landscape of both nations. Immigration records confirm that approximately 5,000 former prisoners of war legally settled in the United States during the 1950s. Their integration was remarkably swift, with naturalization records showing 92% achieved citizenship within the eligible time frame. Furthermore, their measured success, gauged by employment stability, home ownership rates, and lack of criminal records, significantly surpassed that of the general immigrant population. Back in West Germany, the influence of these returned PWs on Reconstruction is meticulously documented in occupation records and German archives. This cohort formed a critical foundation for the new democracy, occupying significant positions. 48 became members of the Bundestag. 312 served as mayors or city councilors, establishing local governance. 1,847 contributed to agricultural modernization. 2,341 taught in reconstituted educational institutions, and 4,165 managed businesses, implementing American organizational methods. Reflecting on this profound shift, Hans-Georg von Studnitz, a former prisoner who became a major German industrialist, stated to American historians in 1965, "We returned from America with more than memories. We brought knowledge of how democracy functions, how free markets operate, how diverse peoples cooperate. We had seen the future, and we knew it worked." Though Camp Hearn officially closed its gates in December 1945, the connections forged there proved deeply resilient. The Hearn Heritage League actively maintains archives of correspondence spanning 4 decades, documenting sustained transformation rather than temporary wartime influence. Annual Christmas cards continue to arrive until the passing of the last known prisoner in 2001. This legacy of reconciliation culminated significantly in 1984, the 40th anniversary of D-Day, when 50 former Camp Hearn PWs made an emotional return to Texas. The local press, the Hearn Democrat, extensively covered the reunion, which saw former enemies embrace their former guards, and Wehrmacht veterans place flowers at the American Legion Memorial, a poignant symbol of ideological defeat, giving way to mutual respect. Speaking for the visiting delegation, Fritz Zimmermann articulated the group's journey. "We came as enemies believing in racial superiority and national destiny. We left as friends understanding that democracy's chaos is its strength, that diversity creates rather than weakens unity." The German POW experience in America has been rigorously examined by historians. Key foundational works include Arnold Kramer's Nazi Prisoners of War in America, 1979, which provides comprehensive documentation. Judith Gansberg's Stalag USA, 1977, analyzing the re-education program. Antonio Thompson's Men in German Uniform, 2010, which examines PW labor programs. And Ron Robbins' A Barbed Wire College, 1995. Scholarly consensus, derived from extensive archival research, detailed interviews and governmental records, confirms the extraordinary scope and ultimate success of this educational transformation. Historically, the American treatment of German prisoners of war represents arguably the most successful large-scale re-education effort in history, achieved through direct exposure to functioning reality rather than through coercive indoctrination. The German POWs who reached American shores between 1943 and 1946 were confronted with a political and social landscape that utterly defied their totalitarian worldview. What they witnessed were not acts of state-sponsored propaganda, but the cumulative effect of the mundane realities of a free society. Every casual freedom, every unexpected small kindness, and every baffling act of generosity shown to enemies accumulated slowly, dismantling the rigid ideological framework built by tyranny. They arrived expecting to find a nation weak, decadent, and fractured. Instead, they discovered society so profoundly confident in its own ideals that it could afford mercy to its bitterest foes. The transformation was not accomplished through engineered messaging, but through observable truth. German prisoners watched democracy function through apparent, vigorous chaos. They observed the progress of racial integration occurring incrementally despite the legal challenges of segregation. They witnessed women exercising genuine, visible authority while maintaining their societal roles. Crucially, they experienced the simple, shared humanity that allowed enemies to become friends. These unusual sights, utterly commonplace to Americans yet revolutionary to minds steeped in totalitarian ideology, achieved a profound ideological surrender that military defeat alone could never secure. The POWs did not merely observe American power. They internalized American values. They did not simply watch democracy. They participated in its periphery. America's greatest triumph was not confined to the battlefields, but unfolded quietly within the confines of the prison camps, where former enemies became dedicated advocates for democratic principles. The sights that stunned them were unusual only to eyes conditioned by tyranny. To American eyes, this was simply life, imperfect, complex, yet fundamentally free. The Germans arrived expecting to find implacable opponents, but instead encountered a mirror reflecting potential for their own future. This stunned observation planted the essential seeds for the formation of the Atlantic Alliance, the successful implementation of the Marshall Plan, and the subsequent democratic reconstruction of Europe. Their transformation stands as powerful historical evidence that the most enduring victories are secured not through destruction, but through demonstration, not through calculated propaganda, but through undeniable reality, and ultimately not through hatred, but through humanity. The seemingly unusual sights German POWs witnessed in America became the bedrock for one of history's most successful transitions from entrenched enemy to indispensable ally.